Back-to-back trophyless seasons, 3 managers in 18 months, a 6-4 Champions League demolition against Bayern, and a dressing room split between 2 superstars who refused to share the spotlight. At the centre of the wreckage, a man who predicted all of it, 7 years before it happened. Jose Mourinho warned Real Madrid about complacency. So why did the biggest club in the world ignore the one man who saw the collapse coming? And why is his 2019 diagnosis now reading like a word-for-word autopsy of their 2026 season? To understand what Mourinho saw, you need to understand what Real Madrid was in 2018. They had just won their 3rd consecutive Champions League title, their 4th in 5 years. Zidane, the manager who delivered this absurd run, walked away at the peak, not fired, not pushed, he just left. He said the club needed a different voice, which, if you think about it, was its own kind of warning. Then Cristiano Ronaldo left for Juventus, the man who had scored 450 goals in 9 seasons, the man who bent entire tactical systems around his presence, gone for 100 million euros. And Real Madrid decided not to replace him, not with a single marquee forward signing. They looked at a Ronaldo-shaped crater in their squad and thought that Benzema would handle it. Mourinho watched this from a distance. He was between jobs, having left Manchester United, and he was doing punditry. But he was not doing the usual ex-manager routine of vague observations and diplomatic nothings. He was performing an autopsy on a patient that was still breathing. His diagnosis in March 2019 was surgical. He said that winning 4 Champions League titles in 5 years had created what he called a mistaken mental state. Too much success, too fast. The squad's confidence had curdled into complacency. Players stopped preparing with the same hunger. Why would they? They had already conquered everything. He flagged the 2018 World Cup. Half of Real Madrid's squad had played deep into that tournament. Luka Modric reached the final with Croatia. Rafael Varane lifted the trophy with France. These players came back exhausted, running on fumes and muscle memory, and Mourinho argued that the physical toll negatively affected the start of the season. Not an excuse, a fact that everyone at the club chose to ignore. But the real insight, the one that would age like prophecy, was about the midfield. Mourinho described Casemiro, Kroos and Modric as very positional. Brilliant at controlling tempo, exceptional at recycling possession, the best midfield trio in the world at dictating where the ball goes. But none of them were making the runs that Cristiano Ronaldo used to feed off. None of them was arriving late in the box. None of them were adding goals from central areas. He pointed at Barcelona's Ivan Rakitic, who had just scored against Madrid by breaking forward from midfield, and asked where Real Madrid's version of that was. Who was making those penetrating runs? Who was arriving in the box when it mattered? Nobody. That was the answer. And Mourinho knew it. He said Real Madrid did not find the right dynamic to offset that important absence of goals. The system was designed around a player who no longer existed at the club. Instead of rebuilding the system, they were hoping the old one would keep working without its most important component. It didn't. 6 months later, September 2019, Real Madrid had started the new season poorly. A 3-0 humiliation at home to PSG in the Champions League group stage. Eden Hazard, the supposed Ronaldo replacement, the 100 million euro man who was going to restore the goals and the glamour, was already injured. The Spanish media was in full crisis mode, and the vultures were circling Zidane's job. So the press went to Mourinho with the question they always ask him, the same question, would you go? Most managers in his position would have played coy, left the door open, maybe dropped a hint about unfinished business, let the speculation build. Mourinho did the opposite. He defended Zidane. He told reporters that Real Madrid was 2nd or 3rd in La Liga, close to 1st, and that it was not as bad as the headline suggested. One win could put them top of the table. The situation, he said, was being exaggerated by people who benefit from exaggeration. Then he went further. When asked about the rumours linking him to Zidane's job, he did not deflect. He confronted it head-on. He said there are two types of rumours. The kind that puts his name in the mix, while another coach is still in the job. He did not like that. There is something called respect, and he meant it. And then the line that would define his relationship with Madrid for the next 7 years. He said he would not like to return because they have a coach, and he cannot coach a team that already has one. He said he was not there to sell smoke. He said he would like things to go well and for everything to be resolved. For a man often accused of ego, of self-promotion, of loving the spotlight more than the job, this was remarkably selfless. He was telling Madrid publicly that Zidane deserved time and support, that the crisis was manufactured by the same media machine that would manufacture the next crisis and the one after that. That loyalty to the current manager mattered more than his own ambition. Madrid ignored it. The press printed the quotes, the cycle moved on, and the club continued down the exact path Mourinho had warned them about. Here is where the timeline gets cruel. After Mourinho's warnings, Real Madrid went on to win 2 more Champions League titles, 2022 and 2024. Zidane won the 2022 title before leaving again. Ancelotti returned and delivered the 2024 trophy with one of the most dramatic Champions League campaigns in history. Vinicius Jr. became a global superstar. Jude Bellingham arrived from Dortmund and scored goals that did not seem physically possible. For a brief, intoxicating window, it looked like Mourinho had been completely wrong. The system worked, the midfield evolved, the goals came from everywhere. Real Madrid was not just surviving without Ronaldo. They were thriving. The old concerns looked outdated. The warnings felt like relics of a different era. But here is what nobody noticed, what nobody wanted to notice. The problems Mourinho identified in 2019 had not been fixed. They had been masked by individual brilliance so extraordinary that it papered over every structural crack in the foundation. Thibaut Courtois played like a wall in the 2024 run. Vinicius turned into a one-man wrecking ball who could single-handedly dismantle any defence on his night. Bellingham arrived and did things that no midfielder in the squad had done in years. Exactly the kind of penetrating runs and late arrivals in the box that Mourinho had begged for 5 years earlier. The structure was not better, the talent just got louder. There is a critical difference between those two things, and that difference only becomes obvious when the talent stops performing. Mourinho, watching from Roma and then Fenerbahce, knew what happens when you paper over structural cracks with individual genius. He had seen it before, he had lived it. Eventually, the genius has a bad day, or an injury, or a contract dispute, and then you're standing in the rubble wondering why the building fell down when the answer was always the same, because nobody fixed the foundation. Summer 2024. Real Madrid finally signed Kylian Mbappe. The transfer saga that had consumed European football for 3 years was over. The best young forward on the planet was coming to the Bernabeu on a free transfer from Paris Saint-Germain. This was supposed to be the move that launched another dynasty. The Galactico signing to end all Galactico signings. The missing piece that would make an already dominant squad truly unstoppable. Except Mourinho had already identified the fundamental problem years earlier. It wasn't about talent. It was never about talent. It was about structure. Mbappe is a left winger. Vinicius Jr. is a left winger. Playing them together meant one of them had to move centrally, and given that Vinicius had spent 3 years establishing himself as the most dangerous wide player in the world, he wasn't moving. Mbappe drew the short straw, and suddenly, a player whose entire game is built on running at defenders from wide positions, on using his terrifying pace against fullbacks in transition, was being asked to play as a central striker. A role he'd never consistently thrived in. A role that required hold-up play, link-up movement, and positional discipline that his instincts actively fought against. The numbers told the story instantly. Real Madrid's non-penalty expected goals per match dropped from 1.72 to 1.54 after Mbappe's arrival. Read that again. They signed the most dangerous forward in world football, and their attack got worse. They weren't creating more chances, they were creating fewer. The attack, which should have been the most terrifying in European football, looked congested, predictable, and weirdly static. Mourinho had warned in 2019 that the team needed to find the right dynamic. Instead, they'd signed the most coveted player in the world and made the dynamic worse. And then the dressing room started to crack. In 2024, Mourinho made another observation that would prove devastatingly accurate. He warned about the dressing room atmosphere at Real Madrid, specifically the dynamic between Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. His words were precise. Talent helps you win matches, but harmony helps you win titles. He was not being philosophical. He was issuing a tactical warning dressed in a proverb. Two alpha personalities were competing for the same spaces, the same moments, the same glory, who both wanted to take the decisive action, who both saw themselves as the main character. Without what Mourinho called absolute control from the coaching staff, internal divisions would eat the team alive. And that is exactly what happened. Mbappe arrived expecting to be the centerpiece. He was the man Madrid had chased for 3 years, the marquee asset the club hierarchy had promised the world to. Vinicius, meanwhile, had spent years earning that status through sweat, through abuse from opposition fans, through nights when he carried the entire team on his back. Neither was willing to defer. Neither should have been asked to. The coaching staff, first Ancelotti and then his successors, could not or would not impose a hierarchy. The result was a team that looked like 11 individuals sharing the same shirt, rather than 11 players executing a collective plan. Mourinho saw this from thousands of miles away before it happened. He had managed dressing rooms full of egos at Inter, at Chelsea, at Real Madrid itself. He knew that talent without structure is just expensive chaos. He had been saying it for years. The managerial carousel that followed would have been funny if it were not so predictable. Carlo Ancelotti, the beloved veteran who had delivered the 2024 Champions League, left in May 2025 for the Brazil national team job. His final season had already shown deep cracks. No trophies. Barcelona had swept the domestic titles, winning La Liga, the Copa del Rey, and the Spanish Super Cup at Madrid's expense. The man who had won everything there was to win had been slowly worn down by a squad that no longer responded to his approach. His replacement was Xabi Alonso, the prodigal son, the former Real Madrid midfielder who had turned Bayer Leverkusen into unbeaten Bundesliga champions with a playing style that the football world could not stop praising. He was supposed to be the long-term answer, the man who understood Madrid's DNA because he had lived it, the future Guardiola. He lasted 8 months, a poor run of results, a Super Cup final loss to Barcelona, and suddenly the Bernabeu had consumed another manager. Alonso was sacked in January 2026. The man Mourinho had praised as a top-level manager was chewed up by the same machine Mourinho had warned about. The same dressing room issues, the same structural imbalances, the same lack of collective identity that Mourinho had identified years before. Alonso walked into a broken system and was blamed when it did not magically fix itself. And the replacement, Álvaro Arbeloa, promoted from the Castilla youth team, an interim appointment that screamed desperation, not strategy. Mourinho's reaction was the quietest devastation. He expressed surprise publicly when coaches with hardly any experience or no history are given the opportunity to manage the world's biggest clubs. He did not name Arbeloa directly. He did not need to. Everyone with a functioning brain knew exactly who he was talking about. 3 managers in 18 months. 0 trophies across 2 full seasons. The instability Mourinho had diagnosed from the very beginning was now the defining feature of the club. If the domestic failures stung, the European collapses were an outright humiliation for a club that had built its entire identity around the Champions League. In the 2024 to 2025 season, the reigning European champions were dismantled by Arsenal, 5-1 on aggregate in the quarter-finals. Not a close tie decided by a bad refereeing decision. Not an unlucky exit on penalties after a heroic defensive effort. A demolition. Arsenal were faster, sharper, more organised and more hungry. Mbappe limped off injured. Fans at the Bernabeu jeered their own players. The stadium that had hosted so many magical European nights walks in, where Ramos had scored in the 93rd minute, where Bale had scored that bicycle kick, where Vinicius had danced on the biggest stage, became the scene of the crime. 1 year later, Bayern Munich did it again, 6-4 on aggregate in the 2025 to 2026 quarter-finals. Another high-scoring collapse that suggested Madrid could create chances but could not stop conceding them. 2 consecutive last 8 exits. For a club that had won 6 Champions League titles in 11 years, this was not a dip in form. This was not bad luck. This was a fundamental change in what this team was. And after the Bayern elimination, Mourinho delivered the line that pulled every thread together. He said that too many players want to be decisive, that the team had become a collection of individuals rather than a cohesive unit, that the structural balance was gone, the same diagnosis, the same words. 7 years later, nothing had changed except the scorelines, which had gotten considerably worse. By February 2026, Mourinho was managing Benfica. Fate, with its terrible sense of humour, drew his team against Real Madrid in the Champions League playoff round. Before the match, he delivered what might be his most perfectly crafted piece of psychological warfare. He warned his own squad and the media that despite Madrid's struggles, despite the managerial chaos, the dressing room fractures and the back-to-back European humiliations, a wounded king is dangerous. Think about that for a second. He was about to play the club he still loves, the club he had spent 7 years trying to help from afar with warnings that were ignored and diagnoses that were dismissed. His message was not mockery, it was not schadenfreude, it was respect, wrapped in a warning, delivered with the timing of a man who had been thinking about this exact moment for a very long time. He also openly declared his desire to eliminate Real Madrid from the competition. Not out of malice, not to prove a point, but out of pure competition, because that is what Mourinho does. He loves the club, but he loves winning more. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you care about is beat them until they are forced to look in the mirror. Through every warning, every diagnosis, every uncomfortable truth delivered to a club that covered its ears, Mourinho maintained something his critics never expected. Loyalty. "I have always been a Madridista and always will be," he said in 2023. And he meant it. Every single critique came from the same place, not from a man trying to undermine the club, not from someone angling for a job or settling a score. From a man who built something at Real Madrid between 2010 and 2013, who broke Barca, who won La Liga with 100 points against the greatest club team ever assembled, and who never stopped caring about the institution even after it stopped listening to him. His warnings were not predictions offered to make himself look smart when they came true. They were diagnoses from someone who understood the patient better than the doctors currently treating it. The complacency after too much success, the structural imbalance in midfield, the wingers who could not score, the dressing room that needed a firm hand, not a friend, the danger of stacking talent without building a system to contain it. He said all of it. He said it first. He said it clearly and without hedging. And Real Madrid, with the arrogance that comes from winning too much too fast, the exact complacency-born arrogance Mourinho had identified in March 2019, decided they did not need to listen. Here is where Real Madrid stands in April 2026. 2 consecutive trophyless seasons, the first time that has happened in 16 years. 7 tournaments entered across those 2 seasons, 7 tournaments lost. 9 points behind Barcelona in La Liga, with the title mathematically alive but practically, mercifully, dead. Eliminated from the Champions League in the quarter-finals for the 2nd straight year, conceding 11 goals across those 2 ties. 3 managers hired and 2 fired in the span of a season and a half. Kylian Mbappe, the man who was supposed to be the solution, has become the embodiment of the problem. His form has dropped off a cliff in the second half of this season. His ego has disrupted the dressing room hierarchy. His presence has made the team less effective, not more, by every measurable metric. fans have booed him at the Bernabeu, the press has turned on him, and the club's hierarchy, the same people who spent 3 years and untold millions in wages chasing his signature, now cannot figure out what to do with him. The Copa del Rey final against Barcelona in April 2025 might have been the lowest point. Real Madrid boycotted pre-match events to protest the appointed referee. They played the game, lost 3-2, and then descended into chaos. Multiple players were sent off for dissent in the aftermath. One media outlet called them the world's pettiest sporting institution and said the club had shown its true colours. It was behaviour that screamed a club that had lost its identity, its composure, and its direction all at once. And somewhere, Mourinho watched. The man who diagnosed the disease in 2019 when nobody else saw it. He identified the structural failures before they became structural collapses. He warned about complacency, about midfield imbalance, about the danger of relying on individual brilliance instead of collective systems. He told them about dressing room harmony before the dressing room fractured. He cautioned against inexperienced coaching appointments before they failed. He saw the fundamental problem with the Mbappe project before Mbappe even arrived. He was right about all of it. Every word, every warning, every diagnosis delivered with precision and dismissed with arrogance. The uncomfortable truth about Jose Mourinho and Real Madrid is not that he is a genius who can see the future. It is that he is a man who loved a club enough to tell it what it did not want to hear. And the club, drunk on its own success, convinced that trophies meant the system was working when the system was already rotting, ignored every single word. The gods of football were listening, and they had a sick sense of humour, because the man who could have fixed it was never invited back to try. And the club that refused to listen is now living in the exact future he described 7 years ago on a television set to an audience that did not care.